Well, welcome to our webinar on HR and all things hiring and team. I really appreciate you guys spending your lunchtime with us. I think we've got some really useful information here, and I hope that it's really actionable just right from the start. So I am Emily Floyd, CEO of Altus Pediatric Billing. We have Andrea with us. She is our practice relations manager and communications manager. And the way that we will work this is I will go through the slides in the presentation, and then if you have questions at any time, feel free to throw them in the chat. There's also a Q&A button that you can add questions to. And then when we get to the end, we will go through those questions and answer as many as we can. We've booked a little bit of extra time for this, so we should have plenty of time to get through everything. I am going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. You see that? Perfect. All right. Let's get started. So the first thing that I really want to highlight is that if you are understaffed, it is a crisis. You absolutely positively cannot reach any other practice goal if you don't have all of your positions filled with the right people. If you find yourself in this situation, it's just one of those things where everyone really needs to jump in and work on it so that you go train and retain and keep the best people. And if you find that you're chronically understaffed, someone along the way is probably making one of these mistakes that we're going to talk about today. So at the end of our time together, you should have some ideas for how you can solve this problem if it's something that you're dealing with right now. So today we will talk about HR process tips from hiring to firing, and this will be applicable whether you oversee the process and someone else executes it, or if you're actually executing it yourself. We'll talk about a bunch of different scenarios that we see over and over again in pediatric practices, and then we'll take time to answer questions in the chat. So the first thing you have to do when you are understaffed is you've got to get some applicants. And really, this is all a matter of marketing. So I've got some do's and don'ts here. Absolutely, positively provide a really clear job description. Don't assume that because someone has held this job that they just understand what's going to be expected of them. Every practice is really different. MAs are a really great example of this. Someone saying they've had experience as a pediatric MA could mean a lot of different things. It's, some get hired for small practices where it's always been all hands on deck, so they've done all aspects of the job, or sometimes people are in bigger practices and they come in and they only know one or two of the key things in the role. So don't assume that it's going to be the same across the board. Next, create positions that are right for the business. Don't create a position just for someone in your office. So let's say you hired Sally for the front desk. She seemed really, really great in her interview. And now that she's in role, she's struggling a little bit, but you really like her. So you carve out something like an eligibility coordinator for her to take over while you now go and try to fill this front desk. Probably don't need a 40-hour-a-week eligibility coordinator, so you want to avoid finding yourself in that situation. As you're putting together that application, make sure that you're writing things from the applicant's point of view. And we're going to talk about that a little bit in a few minutes, but a lot of times you just see job postings that only focus on the company and the workplace and doesn't really speak to what they might be looking for. Next, be really authentic about who you are and what your practice is like. You guys are pediatric practices, so you're probably a lot of fun. But if you just try to sound like everyone else or copy someone else's job description, they're not going to get a sense of your personality, a little bit of a sense of who you are. So don't be afraid to step away from what everyone else is writing and just really let them see who you are. And if you're a mess and you have a lot of problems to fix, be a mess and be honest about the problems that they're going to fix. That's going to help you really bring in the right person. One thing that comes up as a question a lot is about salary information. Make sure that you're sharing salary information before you've invested too much time. You don't want to get to your fourth or fifth interview, make them a job offer, and then have them say, oh, absolutely not. I need 30% more than that. You might scare off some people, but you're better off scaring them off because they aren't going to come work for you if they don't align with that salary expectation. And if you have a salary range, be really transparent about what that range is. So let's say you will pay, $23 to $25 an hour. Make sure that you know what that difference is between a $23 an hour applicant and a $25, and be able to explain it. So maybe it's years of experience or a certain type of experience that you are willing to pay more for. Maybe it's someone who is bilingual. Don't just hire someone on the lower end of a range and then expect them to understand why they didn't get the higher range. I promise you, every single person who applies is picturing themselves at that higher range. So no surprises. And then this one's really, really important. Assume that your team is going to see every job that you post. You cannot pay new hires more than you are paying your current team. If someone's been with you for 2 years and they make $25 an hour and they come across, someone, sends them a note sends them your job description and says, oh, I see you guys are hiring, and it shows them $27 an hour, you're going to lose some long-term staff. All right. So for that job posting, get people excited and let them know exactly what's coming. Be really honest. So here you've got medical assistant, no nights, no weekends. A lot of MAs are coming from hospitals or 24-hour clinics where they are not used to being able to keep their nights and weekends free. So highlight that. That's a benefit for them. And then, we've got some more, you want to make a real impact. And then I've highlighted here, this is your chance to play a key role in developing clinical protocols. Well, that's really code for like, hey, we need some help. And it's going to bring in the right person who's excited about maybe walking into something and helping create something. I worked with a practice, gosh, it's been 7 or 8 years ago now. I worked with a practice that was just turnover, 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 turnover at the front desk because they didn't have training. They didn't have they just kind of threw people in and said, here, kind of figure it out, because they didn't have anyone with enough tenure to actually train anyone. So as I helped them with this job description, we just told people, hey, this is what you are walking into. And when we watched people light up because they were excited about the opportunity to create something. And now it's been all these years and they still have 2 of the 3 people that I helped them hire 7 or 8 years ago. The right people will be excited about something like that. And then you can see here, here's why you're going to love it. You're going to have work-life balance. You're going to have all areas of the MA role. You're going to be able to create protocols, and it's a great collaborative team. And you can see here, we've put the pay. So it's very clear what they can expect if they apply and ultimately take the job. All right. So now you've put out the applications. You've received some. Here's something that will save you hours upon hours upon hours. Do not read any more resumes. If you are used to putting a job out there and getting a big old stack of resumes and going through them, then you've probably had that experience where you comb through them, you finally find 5 people that you're really excited to talk to. You call them, you leave them messages, I really want to talk to you, you applied for this job, and you never hear from them again. That's because they have mass applied to your job and probably didn't even read the job posting before they just hit, sure, send my resume. So instead, you need to have an application that requires some time and investment from them. Don't let them mass apply. You need to read their applications instead of their resumes. Have some sort of second round of interaction before you do an in-person. That just further weeds out people who just borderline mass applied and weren't really all that serious about the job. So do that instead of immediately moving into in-person interviews. Know what your non-negotiables or your deal breakers are and stick to them. Don't waver. And then make sure you use an online calendar for interviews. Don't try to coordinate calendars and are you free at this time? Have something really simple where they can just book a time and come in. So, when I talk about applications, what does that mean? This is that key step. You've got to create some sort of, yes, thank you for submitting your resume, but if you really want to be considered for this job, you need to click here and fill out this form. Google Form is free. It's really easy to use. And let people know you've got to fill this out or you won't even be considered. As far as the questions that you want to ask on this, you only want 2 or 3 because again, you're really just looking for someone who actually read your job description and is willing to take a couple of minutes to actually tell you a little bit about themselves. And you want the questions to be enough that you can delete a lot of people quickly. So some questions that I've seen people use, and certainly in our billing that we use, are things like, do you have 2 years of experience in a pediatric practice? Why are you looking for a new position? It is wild what people will tell you when you do this. They are very honest, and you can weed out a lot of people really quickly that way. And then one thing that I like to do is say, this job pays X amount. Is this acceptable to you? And that way, you know that they know how much it's going to pay. When you actually meet with them and job offer them and they try to negotiate for something more, you can say, hey, we talked about this really early on, and this is a way that you have made sure that they have seen that. All right, so you read some applications, you got in touch with them, they came in for an interview. Once you get them in for that, you really want to focus on what they did and not what they say they would have done you don't want them to be telling you what they would do in a situation. So we will definitely get to some sample questions, but just some do's and don'ts for the interview stage. Do screen for core values and your cultural fit. Don't just rely on experience questions to decide. If you have, you should have a question for each one of your core values. So if you have a lot of them and 2 different people are going to be interviewing them, split up. Okay, I'll do these 3. You take on these 2. You don't have to ask each applicant each question, but you'll get a sense for all your core values that way. Then ask for examples of behaviors instead of what they would do. So when you ask the question, what would you do if you had an angry patient in front of you? They're going to turn on okay, well, I would ask them some questions. I would try to calm them down. They can give you a really textbook answer. But when you say, hey, tell me a time that you had an angry patient in front of you, what did you do? Again, people are shockingly honest in interviews. They're probably, they're not probably going to say this, but someone could say, oh, well, I told them to just get out of my office, that we don't do that here. So when you ask for that example, that is, you're going to get a lot of color there. Make sure you standardize the questions that you ask. Don't just wing it. That's going to make it a lot easier to compare applicants when you've met with everyone. Coordinate with everyone. So if other people are doing interviews, don't assume that everyone's looking for the same things you are. You might be really, really looking for core values and cultural fit and say, this isn't the right person for us, but someone else is interviewing them and really looking for technical skill or experience, and they think that they're perfect. So now you've evaluated them in two very different ways. So coordinate if you have multiple interviews going on. Just like with the applications, know your deal breakers. Don't waver. Don't interview 5 people and get discouraged and say, well, they all had something that was, they all broke one of my deal breakers. I can't go forward with any of them. You have those deal breakers for a reason. And go with your gut. So don't ignore a bad feeling just because they look really good on paper. Now, if everyone is breaking a deal breaker and everyone is a bad gut feeling, might be time to bring someone else in and be like, hey, can you just kind of check me on this? Am I being too strict or too hard? Or am I looking for things that I shouldn't be looking for in this pay range? But for the most part, if you stick to your deal breakers and go with your gut, you're going to make better decisions. So, speaking of deal breakers, here are 3 of my non-negotiables. Like, you absolutely positively cannot be late to the interview. The only exception is if there is some newsworthy event that kept them away. If, let's say, I-35 shut down and they were like, I was on I-35 and it is on the news that it was closed for 30 minutes, maybe that would be acceptable. But if they just ran into traffic or couldn't find the office, keep in mind, this is the best you're ever going to see them, and they were late. They're going to be late when they work for you. If they badmouth their current role or a former practice that they were with, that is a deal breaker. It's only a matter of time before they are badmouthing you. And when I ask people, why are you looking for a new position? If the only thing that they say is that they're looking for more money, that tells me that they're just going to keep looking for more money. So even as soon as they start with you, they're still going to be looking for a different position. So what are some sample interview questions? So I have some here that are cultural fit questions, and then I have some that are work experience. So examples of culture. If your culture is patient service, or one of your core values is patient service. So tell me about a time that you went above and beyond to help a patient. Let's say you really stand for teamwork. Tell me about a time that you could tell a coworker needed help. What did you do? And let's say it's accountability. Tell me about a time that you made a mistake. You want good, solid examples. And is that the kind of thing that you're expecting in your practice when you talk about this being a core value? For work experience, again, you're asking for real experiences, not what they would do in a situation. So tell me about a time you were overwhelmed. What did you do? How did you handle that? Tell me about a time when you disagreed with how the practice was doing things. What happened? And the third example here, tell me about your typical day in your current role. And this one can be really helpful when you just want to make sure that they've done all of the things that you are going to need them to do in your new role. So for example, if we go back to the MA example that we talked about earlier, if they say, I come in every day and I'm in charge of rooming patients, then oh, they probably don't have the level of clinical expertise or experience that they need that they're going to need in your practice if you're expecting them to do all of the MA clinical work with a patient. But it's a great conversation starter. Keep asking more questions. But that's a good one that usually adds a lot of clarity. All right, you found someone, you've brought them on. You're excited. It's time for them to get started. You probably feel relief that you filled the position, but you want to make sure that you give them an outstanding onboarding experience. And I think that this is something that really gets forgotten and is one of the biggest mistakes that practices make. You've got to think about how people are going to remember how you made them feel. So if you made them feel really welcome, you were really excited about it, they're going to have a really good positive first day that they're going to tell other people about. So make sure that you choose a slower day and time for their first day. Don't start them right into the craziness first thing Monday morning. There's nothing that says you can't bring them in at 10:30 on a Tuesday. Make sure you actually prepare a physical space for them. Don't expect them to try to squeeze their way in or find a place for their personal items. Prepare it for them in advance. Do something really fun to celebrate their arrival. It can be ordering pizza for everyone. It can be, having some Tiff Streets or cookies delivered to welcome them. Don't make them feel like it's just any other day. Make sure that you have a standard process for training, not just, watch what I do and figure it out, take lots of notes. You want to make sure that there's a rhythm to it, that you're expecting different things from them on different days. So speaking of that, make sure you have time for tell, show, do, review training. So what that means is that's where you tell them how to do something, you show them how to do it, you let them do it, and then you review it with them. And when you take the time to do that, it helps really solidify the training or solidify what they're learning. And then remember that you are their dinner conversation. So as soon as they leave for the day, their phone's going to be blowing up. How did the first day go? How is everything? They're going to have dinner with their family. They're going to be like, tell us all about this new practice. Don't forget what it's like to start a new job. You want them to go home and be really excited to be like, listen to how great this place is. I'm so excited that this is the job that I chose. So here are some tips for how to have a great first day. So have a clean workspace, make sure they have the office supplies that they're gonna need, make them a little welcome bag. It can be super simple with some granola bars and a bottle of water. It doesn't have to be anything big and exciting or expensive. Have some sort of card signed by the team. And then if there's anything that you give people to make them a part of the team, have it there for them. Like if you give a hoodie or, embroidered scrubs, things like that, have it ready for them so they have it from day one. It really helps them feel like a part of the team. And then in advance, show them that you're ready and excited by making sure their email address is ready. They have their EMR login information. And if you have name badges, have their name badge prepared. It's simple stuff, but it makes people really feel like they've walked into something where they're really welcome. All right, so they've come in, they've had a really great first day. It's time to set very, very clear expectations. Keep in mind that no one goes to work just to make mistakes. They want to do a good job, and that's where it's your responsibility to tell them how to. So make sure you're giving them a very clear picture of success. Don't assume that they just know what's expected. Tie all of your expectations to culture and practice goals rather than just an arbitrary list of here's how we do things here. You can have, here's how we practice great patient service and have those expectations tied to that. Keep them in writing. Don't rely on getting those expectations out verbally only because people will only retain part of it. If there is an issue or a concern, address it immediately. Don't wait and hope that it'll get better. And review them annually. Make sure that you've got those written expectations, pull them out, have everyone read them every year. That way they don't get forgotten. So here are some sample expectations. So under professionalism and patient service, acknowledge every patient within 30 seconds with a smile and always speak in a friendly tone. What I like about all these sample expectations is they are observable. It's not be nice to patients. It's not deliver a great patient experience. It's acknowledge them within 30 seconds with a smile. You can stand in the corner and see if they do that and speak in a friendly tone. The next one, punctuality and reliability. Arrive on time and clock in only when you're ready to work. Please ensure that your personal items and personal matters are handled before you clock in. Follow our attendance policy and communicate with your supervisor right away if there are any scheduling conflicts or emergencies. You have made it very clear what they need to handle before they clock in, so they're not still trying to make sure their kid has a ride home from school. They're not clocking in and then taking off their jacket and putting their bags away. You've made it very clear what that expectation is. Patient balance collections. All patient balances must be collected before a patient is checked in. That sounds really great, but sometimes they refuse, or sometimes you need to involve a supervisor who's not available. So this expectation covers that. If a patient is unwilling to pay the balance, involve your supervisor. If the supervisor is not available, send a message through the EMR to your supervisor before checking them in. That way they have there's a very clear understanding of what they need to do to try to collect that patient balance, and it acknowledges that it won't always be simple. And then, we give child-friendly and compassionate care. Always greet the patient before the parent and speak in a warm and reassuring manner. Again, very observable. You walk into an exam room, is that person addressing the patient before talking to mom or dad? So, when people follow your expectations, you want to recognize them. You want to catch them doing something right. So, recognize really great performance. Don't skip this just because they're doing their job. You aren't gonna, I don't mean things like, oh, thank you for coming to work on time, but if you see someone doing a really great job, being thorough with eligibility or getting the insurance right before patients are seen, yes, that's part of their job, but if they're really good at it, give them the high five and tell them they're great at it. Be very specific with the recognition. Don't be vague in the behaviors. So instead of, man, you do a really great job with patient care, you can say, man, you're so great with patient care. Your patients ask for you when you give vaccines because you're so good at giving them. Very clear, making the behavior really clear helps make sure that it's repeated. And then when other people hear that recognition, they now have a behavior that they can start to incorporate to try to, um, get that recognition in the future and do a better job. Tailor the recognition to the person. Don't assume that everyone likes public praise. Some people want to hear all of the, yay, cheerleader, you did a great job. And other people would just love a post-it note on their desk or on their computer screen that says, hey, great job handling that difficult patient today. Be consistent. Give praise and recognition regularly. Don't make it occasional. If this isn't something that comes naturally to you, consider adding it into your routine where you're like, okay, every Friday I'm going to take time to shoot an email out to the team recognizing someone with a shout out. They don't, your team doesn't need to know that you're kind of forcing it, but being consistent will go a really long way with the team. Make sure you're tying it to the bigger picture. Don't miss an opportunity to highlight practice goals. So, kind of coming back to core values or practice goals, if you're trying to make sure that each patient is always on the schedule, recognize an MA when you hear them talking to a patient about, hey, I see, I know we're here to talk about your sore throat, but I see that you're overdue for your well check too. Let's make sure you get that scheduled on the way out. You can go out of your way to recognize that because it's a practice goal. And then have a good mix of formal and informal recognition. Don't just rely on something that's very formal. So you might have, an annual party that recognizes everyone or employee of the month, but high fives and shout outs are also really important. So make sure you're incorporating that informal recognition. All right, so get lots and lots of recognition. You're doing a great job. Staff promotions. This is something that I see in so many practices where the best MA is probably not going to be the best manager. They're very different skill sets, but a lot of times, if an office manager leaves, the next person who's thought of is that really strong MA. So when you're thinking about staff promotions, again, you want to have a really clear description. Don't assume that it's clear just because, you've worked with that manager for the last 5 years. Of course you know what their job is. They probably don't know all the ins and outs of it. Do make sure you have the right person for the role. Don't just say, okay, we're just going to keep promoting our best person at some other role. And this is so simple, but overlooked so often. Ask them if they want the job. Don't just hope that they want to take that next step. So I have some stories here. These are true, genuine stories. The first is Lupe. Lupe was a star MA. Her patients loved her. She loved them. Her team, the team she worked with loved her. And one day she got promoted to clinical manager and she was really good at it. But she hated it. She was so unhappy and started looking for MA jobs outside of the clinic. She hated being a supervisor. She missed that interaction and kind of the interaction with the patients. And she missed just being friends with her peers. Now she suddenly had to hold them accountable and try to lead them, and she didn't like that. So luckily we figured this out before she left, but that practice almost lost their star person. We saw another one with Tiffany. Tiffany was fantastic. She was that MA who was amazing at anticipating everything that was needed by her assigned provider. You knew she was always going to get it done and it was going to get done right. She got promoted just kind of very suddenly when the office manager left, and she did a terrible job leading other people. She always wanted to do it herself, which of course she couldn't do when she was leading a team of 10 MAs. She couldn't teach other people how to get the results that she was really good at getting. And ultimately, she was performance managed out of the clinic. And so it's so unfortunate because they lost their top performer and they went through the struggles of trying to make her successful. And they could have saved a lot of time and heartache if they had been screening for the right traits in a leader. So when someone isn't doing particularly well, you do have to have the tough conversation. And a lot of times pediatric practices aren't great at this, but you've got to remember that clear is kind. You're showing them you care when you give them the feedback because you're helping them be successful. So do make sure that you are really direct. Don't water down the message to avoid discomfort. You don't want to say, well, sometimes, gosh, sometimes you're kind of harsh with the patients when you talk to them, but man, you are so organized. When that's the feedback, I promise you the person heard, like, oh, I'm doing a really great job because I'm super organized. Do make sure that you give your own observations. Don't rely on what other people are telling you. And in your leadership positions, there's a good chance that you're not going to be the first person to see the behavior. So if someone tells you Sarah Beth is always rude to patients, don't go talk to Sarah Beth about her being rude to patients. Find yourself in the background listening for that behavior so that when you talk to Sarah Beth, it's not your teammates told me this. It's, ooh, here are a couple things that I observed. Plan that conversation in advance. Don't wing it. When people get emotional or defensive, it's going to knock you right off your game. Just know your speaking points and be ready. Make sure that you document that conversation and the commitments that were made, both commitments you may have made to the person and what they agreed to do. Don't just assume that both people left with the same message. And it's also bonus documentation. If you do end up in a termination situation, you have conversations documented where you have shared this feedback with them. Make sure you're having a dialogue. Don't look for ways to help them. Don't just have a one-sided conversation. This is what I saw. This is what I need. Are we clear? Engage in like, hey, what's going on? And we'll talk about some examples in a minute. Clarify the impact on the practice. Don't just make it an arbitrary list of issues. Use broad themes of behaviors with examples instead of focusing on one specific behavior. So instead of saying, let's say you're working on teamwork, you don't want to say, man, you're always the first person to clock out, even when we still have messages that need to be answered. That's really easy to fix. I'm just not going to be the first person to clock out anymore, and I'll just sit around and wait for someone else to answer the messages. But if you say like, hey, I'm really concerned about your teamwork. I've seen a pattern of you not replying to messages. You let the phones roll right over you when they're going through the queue. I don't see you help with some of the little tasks like emptying the shredder. Now you've given a broad core value and given examples. So it's not just one thing that they need to fix, it's their total commitment to teamwork. And then make sure that you have these conversations in private. Don't ever admonish someone in public. So a couple of conversations here. Someone's late to work. Hey, Meredith, I wanted to check in with you about something really important. I noticed you've been arriving late a few times this past week. Punctuality is crucial. Our patients count on us to be ready as soon as we open. Is there something going on that's making it difficult for you to get here on time? I want to support you, but we also need to ensure that we're meeting expectations. What can we do to get this corrected? And Meredith might say, you know what, you're right. I'm having a really tough week this week because, my mom usually helps me out and she's out of town. Okay, great. When is she coming back? How can we keep this from happening for the next 2 weeks while she's out? And come up with a plan together. Let's say, someone's missing patient prep steps. So, hey, Allie, gosh, I really appreciate your hard work, but there's a pattern that I've noticed. There have been a few times where the vitals aren't recorded, the chart isn't really ready when the provider comes in. It's slowing things down and can impact patient care. I know you're capable of this, so let's talk about what's going on and how we can make sure that this doesn't continue. Poor patient service. Hey, Jennifer, I wanted to bring up a concern. I overheard a conversation earlier where a parent seemed really frustrated, and I noticed that your tone came across as short rather than helpful. I know that dealing with stressed parents can be really tough, but it's important that we always approach them with patience and professionalism. How can we handle these situations in a way that de-escalates tension and maintains our office's reputation for care? And again, you're engaging in a conversation. And then my last example here, Marcy, I appreciate your effort in managing the schedule, but I've noticed several scheduling mistakes lately. Patients are being double booked or scheduled in the wrong time slots. I want to make sure you feel really confident in our system. Let's go over this process again. The clear expectations and the coaching conversations don't always work, so sometimes you do have to terminate employment. Do not be afraid. You've got to do what's best for your office. So when it does get to that, be fair and consistent. Don't hold one person accountable for tardiness and not someone else. Prepare for that termination by backfilling. Don't leave the team in a bad position if you can avoid it. So if you have had coaching conversations, you can tell this just isn't quite gonna work out. You don't have to fire someone and then go open the job description. You can start looking for someone, interviewing someone, and then make that decision for termination when the time comes, or when you have someone ready for that position. This is the controversial one that people are usually shocked by, but make the event quick. It should be no more than 60 seconds when you are terminating someone. Do not let it turn into some back and forth conversation. You'll be better at that if you write it out in advance and you don't wing it. You've got to be really direct, stick to the facts. I'm going to give you a script here in a second. Don't apologize or try to reason with them. You probably do feel bad that you're in this situation, but now's not the time to share that with them. Make sure you document that conversation. Don't lose the opportunity to kind of put the bow on the total process. And then respond to unemployment claims quickly. If they file an unemployment claim and you've done your documentation, there's nothing to be scared of. Just don't ignore that state now. So the script, just follow the script. The outline is restate the issues that were previously discussed, share the example that was kind of the final straw, terminate very clearly, and tie up loose ends. Joan, we have had several conversations about treating coworkers with respect and being professional. Today, when Sarah Beth asked for help answering the phones, you rolled your eyes at her and only answered the phones after Dr. Crater asked you to step in. This is not being respectful to others. We are terminating your employment. Please gather your things. Your last paycheck will be paid via direct deposit on Friday. It is very clear. She no longer works here. There's not any back and forth. There's no, but. No, you have had conversations about it. This is the end. End the conversation. So, not to end on a sad note, but that's the whole process. Let's, open it up to any questions. And I will rely on Andrea for that, and I will stop sharing here. Okay.
Okay. All right, we have what is the best applicant we can get? What if the best applicant we can get doesn't have pediatric experience?
I think, I mean, that's a great question. It is one of our screener questions, and that might not be a deal breaker for you. So you should define the deal breakers for you. And if that's not one of them, I would say have in mind what would be not comparable, but have in mind what you would accept. So maybe you're like, hey, this person doesn't have pediatric experience, but they have 10 years with family practice. Or they don't have pediatric specifically, but they were part of an urgent care that saw a lot of pediatric patients. There are definitely some ways to figure out what's right for your office.
Okay. All right, we have another one. Um, can you talk more about why you said not to read resumes?
So when you're reading the resume, people, I mean, first of all, I've seen a lot that are just written by ChatGPT. And so a resume can look really, really great, and you just kind of realize, like, oh, this actually is you just really polishing up some experience that maybe you don't, I don't want to say don't really have, but it's sounds a lot better or a lot more involved than what you really did. But the number one reason is that it's so easy to get a huge stack of resumes these days. So I know you guys aren't out there trolling the Monster Job Board or anything, but you can go in, I could search for medical assistant, for example, and it would pull up 100 jobs, and I could just click one button and say, send my resume to all 100 jobs. Now you are taking your time to open each resume and scan it. And even if you're only spending a minute or 10 seconds scanning them, the likelihood that you find the ones you like. So you've spent all this time, you reach out to them, and you probably aren't going to hear back from them because it's not until you wrote them that they went and actually read your job description. So now they go, oh, this person wants to interview me. Let me go see what they're all about. And they go, oh, I'm not working for $24 an hour. Or, oh, no, I'm not driving that far. That's one that I've seen a lot. So by having them fill out an application, they've invested some time and aren't mass applying.
Okay. All right. And then I've had two people want to know how do you tell the difference between someone who needs more training versus someone who is truly the wrong fit?
That's a really great question. I mean, I think with core values, those can be pretty easy to spot. So, if they're not the right fit from a cultural perspective, um, they don't give great patient service. They seem to be annoyed by patients, and that's an important part of your role. Um, those things can be a little harder to train. So, if you can give them some specific examples and they just can't quite get there, it's not who they are. And it's going to be, there's not going to be any amount of training that is going to be able to fix it if they're really on one end of the spectrum where they're far away from your ideal. When it comes to the ability to do the job, I think this is going to be really, really difficult because it feels horrible when you realize that someone just doesn't have the capacity to do the job. So if someone is making mistakes and they're not doing a good job, I really would encourage you to look inward first. How do I better communicate with this person what's expected of them? And you have a lot of tools at your disposal. You can record screen shares and give them to them. You can make sure that they're taking really good notes. You can say, man, you and I have talked about this a few times. Let me get someone else in here to show you because maybe you're going to have a better time communicating with them and I'm not explaining it well. So I think the first thing you do is just make sure that you're explaining it in a way that's really digestible. And once you feel really confident with that, if they still can't get it, you're probably going to know. And then it's just time to say, like, hey, this isn't the right position for you.
Okay, we have another one. Do you contact applicants' previous employer to verify employment and get feedback about employee before hiring? I found that some applicants will lie in their resume.
People will lie on their resume. It is
Hmm.
wild. Um, yes and no. If you are able to, absolutely call and verify that reference. We do sometimes have people who are not, who are working for someone and they are not in a position to, they don't want you to call them, call their excuse me, call their current employer because they don't want their employer to know that they are looking for another position. So in that case, it's a little bit tricky, but if you have permission, absolutely make that phone call. Um, they shouldn't legally give you any information about how strong they are. So if you guys are answering questions about how good of an employee they were, don't do that. You really, they should just be able to verify whether or not they worked there, excuse me, whether or not they worked there and whether or not they are rehirable.
Okay, can you talk more about what if someone interviews really well, but your gut says no?
If you get a strong no, it's a no. If you're like, man, I just feel like something's a little bit off here, that's where you can bring in someone else. Hey, I really enjoyed talking to you. I'm going to bring in one other coworker to have a conversation with you and tell them what they need to kind of poke on or dig around on. And then you're getting someone else's perspective. I know we've done that on our team before where you just go, man, I really liked this person, but I'm not really getting a sense of whether or not they're able to do XYZ or have this core value. That's a great opportunity for someone else to go in there with that agenda and figure it out.
Okay, how do you recognize great employees fairly when you don't have a big budget for bonuses?
So I actually have really big opinions about bonuses because you have to be really, really careful if that is your way of recognizing people because people will expect bonuses. So there have been a ton of studies out there that show that people just wrap it right on up into their compensation and they don't even think about it as recognition. They expect it year after year. You can have such fun times with recognition. Um, and it doesn't have to cost anything. I mean, high fives and shout outs, of course, are free. I mean, you can have a little, like a silly little trophy that you pass around from month to month, and that's the prize is you get to have the trophy on your desk. You can have uh, give small things like, okay, you guys, I know we've worked really, really hard for back to school this year. Here's a $5 gift card to everyone for Starbucks. Like, get some extra caffeine, as we power through. You can be creative without spending thousands of dollars on bonuses.
Okay, and then we also have what do you do when you promote someone and then realize it was the wrong decision?
That is hard. It's a lot easier if they also come to that conclusion, but it's really hard to walk that back. It can be if they just truly don't have the capacity for that job, you need to have some very real conversations. And unless they are like Lupe, who I mentioned earlier, who hated the clinical manager role and was just so happy to go back into her, um, individual contributor role, unless it's a Lupe, you're gonna have a tough conversation. They're probably gonna be embarrassed. They're gonna feel like they failed in some way. So, kind of opening that conversation to get a read on how they feel um, is a good way to handle that. But you can't keep someone in a job if you've given them every opportunity to be successful. You can't keep them in that role. You're probably going to lose that person, but you can't keep them in a role that they're just not suited for because I would consider you understaffed. Even if you have all the seats filled, if you don't have the right person in the right seat, I would consider you understaffed.
Okay, and our last question, it looks like, is how long should onboarding realistically take for a front desk employee or MA before they're independent?
I mean, fully independent, I wouldn't be surprised if it didn't take 3 months, 3 to 6 months before they're fully independent. But I think that if you have a really strong training plan, you can have, okay, I want you to master answering the phones and scheduling, and then master that and move on to the next thing. So you can have people within a couple of weeks be competent and able to succeed in certain areas of the job, but I wouldn't really start holding people accountable for a good 90 days. Now, if they're really, 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 really struggling, you need to make that decision before 90 days, but you probably know at 45 or 50 days, like, is this person gonna elevate themselves into this role and be successful? Or is it time to just say, hey, let's cut ties now and backfill the position?
Okay, we got another one. What do you recommend for small practices, solo or only two providers, where staff need to be able to put on different hats? How do you keep expectations clear about that during hiring?
I think you start by making it exciting. There are people who want that, who crave that. I think back even to my own, when I was looking for jobs, I wanted something where it was going to change all the time. So you advertise for that to find it. So you find the person who's really going to be excited about being involved everywhere. You have really frequent conversations. So if you have frequent conversations about the different roles and how to prioritize, and recognize that it's going to be a little bit trickier than just you are clinical MA, you are billing, you are front desk. But keep that conversation open about here's how we prioritize things, here are our core values, and we always want to go to them first. And then have regular one-on-ones where it's like, okay, instead of having tough conversations, you can say, hey, every week when we meet on our one-on-one, tell me about some decisions that you needed to make and how you came to those decisions. And then when you had to prioritize your two or three or five or seven different roles. And then let's talk through if I would have prioritized them differently and just kind of evolve together if you're trying to navigate a smaller practice.
Okay, it looks like that was all of the questions. So, any more questions? Looks like that was very helpful, Emily.
All right. Well, thank you guys for coming. And if you think of any questions, you should have my email address. Feel free to shoot me an email. I think Andrea will be sending out a recording of this within the next few days.
Yes, we will get a recording out. And yes, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. And I know Emily loves covering these topics. So if you also have other topics you think we should cover, reach out and let us know. We love to help practices.
That is true. And I never know what to do next. I never know what the biggest pain points are. So,
Mhm.
all right. Well, thanks, everybody.
All right. Thank you.